Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women, and I want to welcome you all to our special Open Borders event tonight with Michelle Malkin. Michelle Malkin is a superb conservative leader and a role model for young women. That's why we admire her so much at Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women, where our mission is to prepare young women for effective leadership and to promote leading conservative women who are role models for the young women we prepare. At the Center for Conservative Women, we work to advance America's women by promoting and preserving conservative principles. Michelle is an incredible writer and researcher with 6 best-selling books. She's a powerful TV and radio commentator, an original thinker, and a wonderful mother and wife. And she has a heart for young women, helping them to be all they can be. There's a lot more about Michelle's outstanding career and involvement with the center outlined in the program that we passed out, but we're especially proud that we gave her our Woman of the Year award and that she is one of our most requested campus speakers. She's got a speech coming up for us in just a few days. Michelle, I read your book. This is a great book. It is so filled with important information that I've never seen gathered together before. And it shows that when you follow the money, as the book does, you find the truth. She writes a fantastic appraisal of the overwhelming but not hopeless fight to reclaim our borders and our country. And Michelle lays out beautifully how America has a history of embracing people from around the world fleeing persecution and war. After making a very persuasive case in the book, she even tells you what you can do about it. We're so honored to have you with us, Michelle, the day after your excellent book was published, and I want to thank you for all you do to make our country great. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Malkin.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, and I really appreciate it. It is a very significant day to be addressing you about the most important existential policy question in front of this country on the 18th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Who gets into the country? How do we decide what numbers, what factors go into making these decisions? And if we discover that people are here who shouldn't be here, what steps need to be taken to remove those people from the country? In 2002, on the first year anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks, I published my first book with Regnery. And this is really a homecoming, this 7th book of mine, to come full circle, to talk not only about the systemic failures to enforce our immigration laws, and to do so in a positively discriminating way, to be picky and choosy and unapologetic about it. But then now with Open Borders, Inc., who's funding the destruction of America, to trace all of the dots, to collect them and connect them, so that people may understand what larger global forces are at work in usurping the decisions that should really be ours about who gets in, who stays, and who should leave. I want to dedicate my remarks tonight to a friend of many of yours and mine, and certainly a friend of the Clare Boothe Luce Institute, Barbara Olson, who had been scheduled to speak to the Conservative Women's Network and who was a Regnery author, a huge role model of mine. And because this is an institution that honors and promotes conservative women, I hope that new generations of conservative women on college campuses and that are coming into their own epiphanies about the rightness of our principles and values will learn more about this extraordinary woman and her legacy. She was certainly a role model of mine and always a happy warrior with a brilliant smile that I will never forget. And I saw a friend of ours last night when I was at Fox in the DC bureau, who was also a good friend of hers, Victoria Tensing, who helped publicize hell to pay at the time. And as removed as we are from September 11th, 2001, it is still so very raw for us. I lived here in the DC swamp at the time. My husband worked frequently at the Pentagon and was supposed to be at the Pentagon on the day of the attacks. Instead, he was in Maryland in a high-rise building where from the rooftop he could see some of the smoke billowing from the Pentagon crash. We had lots of friends who had lost loved ones who were firefighters and police officers who worked in the financial offices of the World Trade Center. And that's what spurred me to write my first book. I'd never done that before, and I don't know where I got the audacity to think I could do such a thing, let alone approach such an august house as Regnery to publish it. And they did, and they believed in me, and I'm forever grateful for both Regnery and Clare Boothe Luce for helping me to give voice to so many others who are voiceless. Open Borders, Inc. is divided into two sections. The first one, all enemies foreign, and the second half, all enemies domestic. And of course, this is borrowed from the language of the oath of citizenship, which both of my parents took when they became citizens after coming here in 1970 legally from the Philippines. And I've always said, from the time I started covering these issues more than a quarter century as an editorial writer and columnist for metropolitan newspapers in Los Angeles and Seattle, that I was ingrained in this idea that citizenship was not an entitlement, not a guarantee, but a privilege, and a privilege that should be celebrated rather than apologized for. So I've exercised the First Amendment as a living for more than 25 years, trying to disseminate those ideas and educate people about why we are supposed to have an orderly immigration system in the first place. The lost lesson of 9/11 is really that it was all of the lapses of immigration enforcement that colluded to provide this fertile ground for the hijackers in the first place. And we need to tirelessly remind people that every single one of those 19 walked through the front door, not illegally through the southern border. We gave them the free golden ticket into the country. We failed to enforce the rules regarding the overstaying of visas. And the 9/11 Commission's key conclusion that we should build a fully functional biometric entry-exit system so that we could locate visa overstayers, so that we could do something about it, was never implemented. 18 years later, there are nearly 700,000 visa overstayers, and nobody has done anything about it. The primary lesson that all it takes is a teeny tiny minority of evildoers and malefactors blending in among a larger population of upwards of 30 million illegal aliens has been completely ignored. And so for all of the never forget admonitions, the practical fact is that we've hit the snooze button and we still operate in large ways under a cloud of amnesia about what happened 18 years ago today. So many informed consumers of conservative news are very familiar with the role that George Soros has played in funding the open borders infrastructure. And probably the most shocking revelation to me as I did my research was how much of the funding comes from you and me, from taxpayers. That the $18 billion that Soros has earmarked to achieve his agenda is pretty much matched, if not overshadowed, by the billions that are being siphoned from tax coffers to fund many of those tax-exempt nonprofit organizations. One of the things that I think has been really important throughout my career is to give credit to those unsung investigative reporters and independent bloggers who have been doing this work, who have been doing the job that the mainstream open borders media won't do. And in the acknowledgments of my book, and in footnote after footnote, I give credit to those people. These are individuals that will never win Pulitzer Prizes, but have far surpassed all of these media elites, these sort of Sorbonne credentialed journalists who have such a sense of condescension about people who aren't members of the club. And I've always held that sort of strange position as well, because people will laugh if I'm in some mainstream or dinosaur network salon and call myself a journalist, and yet it's okay to be Jose Antonio Vargas, a Soros underwritten, proud, out-of-the-closet, illegal alien journalist who has admitted that he stole somebody's identity, that he used a fake driver's license, that he lied multiple times to his mainstream media bosses, and then bemoans being in the shadows while he's on the lecture circuit for his latest book or movie project. But he's a journalist, and I'm not. It's okay to identify, as Jorge Ramos does, who will be a moderator tomorrow, a moderator. Can we put an IMM in front of that? Immoderator at the Democrat presidential debate in Houston. He calls himself an activist journalist. That's okay. It's okay for Amy Goodman to be an activist journalist. Well, now I'm going around and holding a hashtag stand with ICE sign at rallies because I was tired in my adopted home state of Colorado of watching many of the groups whose money trail I document in Open Borders, Inc. out there actively intimidating and harassing ICE agents who are doing their duty, men and women in uniform from all sorts of backgrounds, races, ethnicities, being demonized essentially as SS guards. And every day it's Republicans and immigration enforcement patriots and supporters of Trump who are accused of inciting violence, while these people have painted a literal target on the backs of men and women in uniform, be they ICE agents or Border Patrol or other employees of the Department of Homeland Security. So I'm an activist journalist. I fully embrace that. But instead, how I'm described in mainstream news articles is white supremacist conspiracy theorist. Fine, you can call me whatever you want, but I think that the facts and the numbers and the dollars that I track in Open Borders, nearly 500 pages, fully cited with multiple appendices, speaks for itself. When I talk about the activist part of the role that I've played in conservative media, whether it was old media as an ink-stained wretch or new media as a blogger and internet entrepreneur, the reason why I've engaged in that is not that I love it. I am by nature an introvert, and I sort of followed my own advice to my kids of faking it till you make it, fake it till you make it, because this is not my natural bent to do this kind of thing. I'm a hellraiser, but I prefer to do it within my four walls of my house. But I felt compelled, and I think that one of the common experiences that I have with a lot of the young women that I speak to at Claire Booth Luce events is that my formative years were really in a college campus where the values and principles that my parents taught me were put to the test, okay? They were not behind me anymore. I had to see whether I truly believed in those same principles and whether I was going to do anything about it. And as many of you know, because my whole life is an open book and transparent, I attended Oberlin College, the Berkeley of the Midwest, the home of the entire safe space concept. And also, I think one of the really early testing grounds of this idea of radical identity politics. Well, up until I went away to college, I really only had a few identities, and one of them was something my parents had always insisted that I embrace, and that is the identity of unhyphenated American. Well, of course, this was an affront to the radical leftists, most of them much more pale than I, reminding me that because I was the color I was, that I should think a certain way. And that same mentality has metastasized and infused the immigration debate. Well, your parents are from a foreign country. You should, of course, embrace the open borders, let them all in, welcome all strangers at all costs mentality. It makes absolutely zero sense to somebody whose allegiance and whose sense of gratitude stems from having an orderly immigration system that, at least in my parents' case, rewarded them because they had to prove that they had a special set of skills, a fealty to Western values, proficiency in English, that little thing to ask of people who come to the country. And so, it's actually quite illogical to accuse me of being some sort of traitor when in fact, what I'm doing is trying to perpetuate the same kind of orderly system for future generations. So I said that this book was somewhat of a homecoming, but for me also, it's I'm not going to say a swan song, but I think it's a natural progression from where I started in my career. And as I mentioned, having done early reporting in the early warning system of Southern California, it was quite clear where we were going to end up in the place that we are. But I would have never predicted that Donald Trump would have embraced this exact agenda and then successfully defeated the entire Clinton machine, along with Hollywood, along with the media, along with every hijacked public institution, and with this entire open borders infrastructure in place. I could have never predicted it. There's a lot of people in the Beltway that lie and said they knew it was going to happen all along. They're lying, fact-checked, false. And what a delight that was. And so that still motivates me now more than ever. I felt, I'm sort of like in the twilight of stage 2 of my life and career, but this is fun. I mean, I think inside the Beltway bubble, it looks very dire, but especially being able to breathe the fine, fresh air of the Rockies and Colorado, I'm much more optimistic than I thought I would be. The end of the book, like the end of Invasion, includes concrete steps that people can take so that they don't feel completely hopeless and helpless at the end of 500 pages, knowing how daunting all of these forces are, how much money is being spent, what we're really up against, knowing that that it is a global network. But I also always feel that if you start out small, then you feel like you can actually achieve real change, even in your own home. That if you can take some slightly inconvenient steps of withholding funding from these organizations, at least knowing what they're doing. And I understand, especially in an age when we've got Silicon Valley so penetrating our daily lives, how hard it is to wean yourself off of Google. I'm sure that there are many in this room who remember that their original corporate motto was "Don't be evil." And they hook you, they addict you to all of their products. It is hard to get off Gmail, but there are options. There are alternatives. Same thing with Amazon and Facebook. And once you sort of go on a little mini hunger strike, a little strike on those things, you realize it can get easier. And we've seen examples of this where some of these corporate social justice warriors have just pushed it too far, and then it becomes really easy. Nike? Gillette, have you seen their stock price lately? And these things can make a difference. Some of them are harder, and I think one of the most shocking chapters that I completed was the chapter on the Vatican, the Catholic Church, and the amnesty profiteers. I am a Catholic myself, and I knew that bad things were going on. I did not know how bad they were. I did not know that there was an entire proliferation of these Catholic groups that were accepting government funds. In fact, majority of the funds in many of their cases coming from taxpayers. The history of the founding of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the Conference of Bishops itself, all of these shelters that are operated from Central America all the way up the spine of Mexico and then into the interior of the country. And I watched a viral video on Twitter of a loyal Catholic churchgoer who was outraged at the cover-ups on the pedophile scandal, set afire a collection envelope. And I would think that knowing what you know after you read the book about the Pope and the Vatican and the Catholic Church's vast role in undermining our borders is a far greater reason to set the collection plate on fire too, along with the envelopes. And I do know that it's incredibly difficult, even now, to speak out about such things. But there does need to be, I think, a grassroots, organic, internal revolt against the Catholic Church for these kind of subversive and seditious activities. And not to single out the Catholic Church, because, of course, there are many other religious nonprofits and who are involved in the refugee resettlement racket, for example. And I name all of those and also give credit to many of the researchers at the Center for Immigration Studies, Ann Corcoran, who is a hero of mine, who runs a blog that discloses a lot of this information that the mainstream media won't, and many other conservative websites that I've given due credit to for their work. If anything, what I try to do is steer readers in the direction of the work that so many of these other great journalists are doing. And unfortunately, a lot of times, they are getting squelched. These voices are, and I've talked about Ann Corcoran's blog, which was hosted on the WordPress platform, just being killed out of the blue a couple of weeks before I finalized the manuscript of the book. It's alarming, and that is why there's an entire chapter in the book as well on the war on free speech that's being waged by Silicon Valley. And we do have a lot of awareness of that in the conservative movement now. But what I'm trying to do with the book is make clear the intersection of the war on our borders, the war on our sovereignty, and the war on free speech. Because in large part, the tactics that are being used against Prager University and very effective people on YouTube and the deplatformings that you're seeing now, those methods really were born and perfected and used against immigration enforcement patriots. And I talk about how in 2006 and 2007, I found myself in one of these videos that was produced by a subsidiary of the Southern Poverty Law Center, essentially. And it was because I had talked about the academic movement around Aztlán and Reconquista. I didn't realize that those were trigger words that I was not supposed to use. Invasion was on that list. Oops, we forgot about that. And you weren't supposed to talk about crime or demographics. And so that guidebook, that list of code words, really morphed into, of course, a larger hidden recipe book that's now being used in algorithms to target even ordinary people, not just high-profile authors or pundits or talk radio hosts or politicians. And these mass purgings that we're seeing at Facebook and YouTube really are aimed at squelching free speech like this book. I mean, I wondered, well, are we going to get it on Amazon? Are we going to be able to talk about it? And it's not something that I ever thought I'd have to worry about. And so I dedicated the book to 3 groups of people. The first was ICE agents, Border Patrol agents, and the people who work at DHS. The second group of people I dedicated the book to were angel moms and dads, the families of victims of illegal alien crime that are sneered at by Open Borders media. And the third group of people were my friends and allies who have been relegated to what I call the Valley of the Banned. And to know that this is a concerted, organized, well-orchestrated effort by the SPLC and Silicon Valley and many other groups that have all sorts of anodyne names, I think should convince and persuade other ordinary Americans to raise their own voices. And I know that Cory Booker is all in all his, I am Spartacus thing. Well, no, we are Spartacus. And, as long as each of us is able to have access to a Twitter account or a Facebook account, we can share that information and provide our own means of creating, whether it's through those platforms or alternate ones, I don't know. But in essence, it's sort of like the analogy of a samizdat in the Soviet Union, of being able to share this information among a grassroots network. So I'm going to open it up to questions, and I thank you for being here. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for writing this book. I'm a Honduran-born, proud, unhyphenated American. I've been living here for 28 years now, and have 4 children. And I can't thank you enough for what you've poured in that book, in the sense that us legal immigrants recognize that you cannot have a country where everybody is trying to come through the back door. I do have a couple of questions that are follow-ups for what you said. I read somewhere that, I can't remember right now where, but in Mexico offering to help the president stem the tide, I read that the Mexican authorities had frozen assets of 2 of the members of
Pueblos Sin Fronteras.
Pueblos Sin Fronteras. Is that true? And do you know of any moves that have been done to immobilize them? Because they seem to be a big part of that spearhead.
Yeah, that's a really good question. As the book was going to press, Ireneo Mujica, who was the head of, well, they say there's no head, but he's the most public face of, he has Chicago ties, and I talk about that in the book. But as the book was going to press, he had been arrested along with one of his other allies. But then they turned around and released them and said that there was not enough evidence. But I guess what's assuring is that they are being monitored on both sides of the border. The point that I've made about a lot of these non-governmental organizations, these NGOs, is they really should be subject to criminal prosecution. And there was another separate organization in Arizona called No More Deaths that actually did go to trial for aiding, abetting, and harboring illegal aliens that they had helped bus across the border. I think there was a hung jury in one case as I was going to press, and the prosecutors hadn't decided if they were going to go for a retrial. What I think is a model is what's going on in parts of Europe. And in Hungary, there is an initiative to stop Soros, and they shut down one of his universities, and they're going after, in Italy, many of these organizations, which are basically serving as, Sherpas across the sea. I think that we should do the same thing. And I think just one powerful prosecution would be a very effective deterrent from other agents who are doing this. When the sanctuary movement in the Southwest arose, there were a couple of trials of some of the leaders. Jim Corbett was one of them, and they openly admitted that they were engaging essentially in human trafficking and laughed about it. And I think they basically got away with slaps on the wrist. But I wouldn't mind seeing criminal prosecutions of some of these church organizations too. And you just mentioned Chicago, which of course I called out Elvira Ariano's church. And Elvira Ariana has been able to basically go back and forth across the border at will, and then head down there with Ireneo Mujica and help out with the caravans. These people are thumbing the nose at the law, and at some point, they're not the ones that you blame. You blame the federal government for not doing its own duty and putting these people in jail. So in chapter 1, which is about what I call the caravan cartel, I talk about many of those religious organizations, and a large number of them are Catholic, that have worked with the UN High Commission on Refugees. And a lot of those shelters, of course, are providing psychiatric care, food, and lodging. And you know, we haven't been able to nail down exactly who'd paid for some of the buses there. But the fact is that there are maps that float out there on the internet, and I joke that it was somewhat like they should have TripAdvisor, like to rate these shelters, because you know they've got little like bed and breakfast signs all the way up Mexico, right up to the border. And you know the open defiance of many of these sanctuary anarchists operating under the guise of Christian compassion really should set afire, I think, ordinary rank and file churchgoers who have not written Romans out of the Bible. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Missy Foxman. I work in tech and I live in Montgomery County, and I'm paranoid for a reason. I wanted to ask you, going back to the journalist who clearly broke the law and stole someone's identity and is admitting this on air, has the statute of limitations expired? I mean, why isn't he arrested? Why isn't his, whoever employs him being fined? I feel like he might be a good public example of, it's probably a statute of limitations, but why is he lauded instead of arrested?
But more recently, he did cross the border illegally as a test, right? And the American government failed the test. Basically, they've made sort of like a triage determination that apparently there are other more important things than making an example out of this Soros mouthpiece and loudmouth. It would have been, a great way of providing a disincentive against ID theft, employment theft, tax fraud, all of it. But I mean, now this guy, Jose Antonio Vargas, who I've debated, by the way, and he's an amiable, affable enough guy. I mean, again, do you hold
criminal?
Right, he is a criminal, but do you hold it against him or against the federal authorities in Oregon, in Washington, D.C., in Philadelphia, where he used to work? All of them looked the other way. Now this guy advises Hollywood script writers to write in open borders, bleeding heart narratives that basically mirror his life story. And this guy goes around and says that he is as American or more American than me or you. So, thanks for speaking out, too.
Hello, my name's Gordon. I'm a cybersecurity student also from Montgomery County. One of the big things, I am American. I've lived abroad a lot, hence the strange accent. But upon moving back here, I realized one of the biggest problems was, there doesn't seem to be any real power for automatic deportation as soon as they cross the border. Whereas I've got family in, say, Australia, and if you try coming there, they just send you back.
Yes.
Do you think that it is even possible to get legislative authority to just send these people back and not clog up our court systems, our legal systems, our medical facilities, et cetera, much the same as if you came into an airport without a visa?
Yes, you've identified one of the key problems. And the reality is that we don't need legislation. The federal government has executive power to summarily exclude any single person at once. We could have that automatic turning away tomorrow, today, if we wanted to, in an hour. Unfortunately, we don't have the will to do it, and the financial interests are such that they override our national security concerns. This is a day where everybody is paying lip service to never forget and never again. And yet we have no idea if we are letting in through the southern border the next 19 to perpetrate another September 11th or another September 12th. And there's an appendix that I think is very important in the book that outlines the dozens and dozens of organizations that make up what I call the illegal alien lawyers lobby. Because what we have down there at the border are immediate pro bono legal seminars advising all of these border trespassers about their rights. Know your rights seminars. And I've talked about this the last couple of days in radio and TV interviews. I toured the ICE detention facility in Aurora, Colorado, and was stunned to see these beautifully new booths where illegal alien detainees can sit down and get access to free LexisNexis. Okay, if you're an independent journalist, if you're self-employed, you cannot afford a subscription to LexisNexis. It is prohibitively expensive. But not only do they get LexisNexis access, they get it in Spanish. There's a special room where they get legal consultants. And in so many ways, as I've talked about since invasion, illegal aliens have more standing in American courts than American citizens do. Thanks to Open Borders, Inc.
Thank you. Since I haven't read the book yet, I don't know, you may have addressed this or not, but I remember when I heard on the news Pope Benedict had just retired, which seemed I didn't know popes could retire. None had previously that I could remember. And then they brought in, and it seemed, since they were known to be a very conservative group selecting the new pope, or at least they had been in the past, I was really surprised that they had selected an open borders advocate and an extremely liberal pope relative to the previous ones. I'm wondering if there was some manipulation involved with all of that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not something I address in the book, but I do document all of the public statements that Pope Francis has made since the election of President Trump, and the guilting of immigration enforcement Catholics by warping Scripture and the Bible, I find especially offensive and noxious. I think that more grassroots Catholics have to find the courage to speak up about this, because we can't enjoy religious liberty if we don't have a sovereign country.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. What resources did you have to be able to dig into the facts?
Yeah, a lot of open sources as well as sources that I've developed over the last 25 years. As I mentioned, I worked at newspapers on both the northern and southern border. The reason that I was overly zealous about the footnoting is that I wanted people to know exactly every single source that I came from. So I erred on the side of being, well, I guess it's the one area that I'm liberal on. A lot of it is government documents, inspectors general reports, IRS documents that are available, FOIA requests that I'd done, as well as original interviews that I'd done. And a lot of them, emails back and forth, for example, with corporate open borders PR agencies that did their best to try and evade my questions, thinking that it would be interpreted as these corporations not taking sides, when not taking sides is taking a side. So for example, I had a number of exchanges with a Microsoft PR person, because I discovered that Microsoft was sponsoring a professorship at New York University that had housed a professor who used his position to dox ICE agents. In other words, to reveal personal information, large swaths of it, upload it onto the internet and have it crowd shared, basically as a dog whistle for all of the SJW minions on Twitter and Facebook to go and target not only ICE employees, but their families. And so I asked the Microsoft PR person, does Microsoft condone doxing and threatening the lives of federal employees? And the answer is in the introduction to the book. But the essence of it was, well, I asked my account executives and colleagues, and I'm sorry, but we really can't get back to you on that. So, if you can wean yourself off of Microsoft Word, do it.
Hi, on behalf of Montgomery County activists, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for agreeing to come to our rally Friday, 11 a.m. Hope the press will come, that you'll all come. There'll be an angel mom and an angel husband. Can you give us any advice beyond the kind of things we're doing? Apparently, we can't do like a recall petition. But even then, we are so thin in terms of this side of the political aisle in Montgomery County. There's not of the 38 elected officials at state and federal and local level, not a single one has been Republican for I don't know how long. And I know you used to live there.
Yes.
So we're all trying to figure out next steps. This rally is going to be great, I hope, and a lot of us do things like testify in Annapolis, but I think that one of these years Maryland is going to become a sanctuary state too. So I just looking for advice for the political activists on the ground beyond the things. I haven't read your book yet, so I only know what you've said so far.
You're doing all the right things, and I'm very excited to be able to attend the rally. I really think that this is a movement that is going to spread nationwide. So what you do is not just being watched in Washington, D.C. and the Beltway area in Montgomery County. You're setting an example for many other citizens in sanctuary cities and counties and states. And so turning out as many bodies as you can is incredibly important as a show of force. And what you do to show up at the city council meetings and to call the county executive to the carpet, being able to interact with the few good local journalists who are willing to cover the wages of open borders, the bloody consequences of it, is extremely important. I don't know what office there would be that you could be able to pick off, but I mean, you do have a Republican governor, and I think putting pressure on Republicans to understand like the vital nature of this issue. I've always hated it. It's always been an irritant over the years when people accuse me, because I've made immigration such a leitmotif of my work, that I'm somehow a single issue writer. Immigration is every issue, and you see that in Montgomery County. It's infected the schools, the illegal alien crime impact and the metastasis of MS-13. And we always talk about MS-13, but there are other illegal alien gangs out there. There's a lot of competition. The effect that it's having on young girls and women. And so not only targeting elected officials, but other special interest groups that pay lip service to these issues. Where are the feminists? You've got 8 now illegal alien rape suspects in custody the thing is that those are the only ones they were caught for. How many other ones that they're not being charged with are they responsible for? How many other besides the 8 have gone through the revolving catch and release door? So I would, take those complaints and that sunlight, straight to the local NOW chapter, not just the Montgomery County executive. And then the Baltimore Sun, what are you gonna do? The liberal papers that do the bidding of Open Borders, Inc., there are ways to expose the money connections there too. And I would start researching, the campaign contributions of some of the executives and the links between some of those journalists at Open Borders, Inc. There was a very important researcher that I highlighted in the book named Owen Lenahan. who had done a study where he was able to show the connections between Antifa and alleged mainstream media journalists. And those journalists, when they are essentially political operatives, need to be outed as well. So, do your own Open Borders, Inc. Investigations into them as well. We don't have political systems like in Europe where you could have third and fourth and fifth parties that are viable. But in the meantime, I think if there's more of an internal revolt within the establishment Republican Party on these matters, and of course these are cleavages that have been highlighted by going all the way back to Phyllis Schlafly's A Choice, Not an Echo. These are battles that have been taking place for decades, if not a century. But ultimately, I would say just don't give up. Keep doing what you're doing.
Hi, my name is Eleni Dorian. I'm also from Montgomery County, and I can't wait to read your book. And I just want to say, Amy, several other people here have done great work in Montgomery County. We go to battle. I'm just a mom, just a citizen. But I would encourage everyone here, wherever your state is, if this is important to you, get involved locally, sign a bill, call your congressman, whatever. There's things to be done. But I have two things that are coming to mind. One, I keep thinking about all the cops out there that are looking the other way, and I guess they're afraid of losing their jobs. But wouldn't it be great, I want to know your take on this, that we could have, I guess, coming down from the president, hey, you'll be protected, come forth, because someone needs to fight back against these sanctuary sheriffs and sanctuary police chiefs, which we very much have in Montgomery County and beyond, to stop this. I actually bumped into a sheriff. I was at a Greek festival. I'm Greek background. And I just kind of went up to him and I said, so what do you think about this latest, law in Montgomery County? And he was a little quiet. And I said, really, it's too bad that, people that are here illegally and go on to commit horrific crimes cannot be turned over. And he said, well, he paused. He said, that's a federal law. We follow county law. And I prodded him a bit further. And his response was, well, what can we do? And I said, I believe some of these cops are coming forward now. And that's why we're hearing about these rapes, because this stuff has been going on for a long time. And he said, yeah, but they're really afraid and they can lose their jobs. So I'd like to, how can we, have you seen in any of your research as you've gone, across east to west, more cops that will do this? And I'd also like to see some of these nonprofits losing their nonprofit status.
Yes.
We go to testify, and there are dozens and dozens of groups, the NAACP, the Clinic, the Catholic Legal, the
Yes.
Lutheran this, Jews for Justice. It just goes on, and they are well-funded. They're there, and the groups that are putting the truth out, like Center for Immigration Studies, FAIR, and others are, I don't want to say hesitant, but they're limited. They're cautious to sort of be front and center to lose their nonprofit status. So I wonder why the feds, again, aren't doing more in that direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for your question and thank you for your activism. Here we are in the heart of Capitol Hill, and it raises the question of why, when Republicans were in power, they didn't do more to extend, for example, the investigation into Acorn, right? Acorn got defunded, they went underground, and then they just morphed into something else. But in the meantime, all of these great groups that you mentioned that have been spotlighting it, there's Capital Research Center, Center for Immigration Studies, a number of independent researchers who've talked about the blatantly political and partisan nature of these nonprofits. Well, when we had, Republicans in power who could have done investigations into these things, they didn't do it. And then they lost the House. So, what are they doing? This is on them. So, stop complaining about the amassing of power of these groups when you could have stopped it when you were holding the gavel. So I think that means that we, too, have to be much more discriminating about who we put into office in the first place. Because what happens is, and this is why I'm a refugee from the Beltway Swamp, is they come here, they grow moss on their backs, and they forget why they were sent here in the first place. So these are many of the forces that President Trump and the enforcement wing of the West Wing face. And unfortunately, there are some of the forces that oppose us that are inside the West Wing. And I always talk about fragging inside the tent, and that's going on too. It's not just that the president has to battle the Jim Acostas of the world, because there are some people who have the same worldview who are nearby him and around him. And I think as long as there are activists like yourself, and as long as the angel families are as vocal and as visible as they can be, and remember that they don't have a voice on CNN prime time, they're not going to be treated sympathetically on the Today Show. But to the extent that we can amplify those voices and keep focused on their stories and do everything that we can to resist this dehumanizing impulse on the part of the mainstream media, Hollywood, and academia, we're fortifying, our own side in that way. Yeah.
Hi, Michelle. Brad Botwin, Help Save Maryland.
I salute you, Brad. Great to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things. So I'd like to also looking forward to the book and being with you on Friday. Did you cover one of my favorite groups, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society?
Yes, they are listed, of course.
Don't call them that anymore.
No, what have they morphed to?
HIAS. I'm Jewish. We ran out of Hebrews, so we had to bring in other people. So the business continues from, I think my grandparents, great-grandparents in New York probably, worked with this group when they came over.
Sure.
But they're on the forefront for refugees and other things. So I'm looking forward to reading that. They're constantly crying that there's not enough refugees to bring in.
Yes.
Do something else. Find something else. And then you mentioned the law firms. So, I guess it was about 2 years ago, we had this rape. It's not really a rape because she was only 14 and it was consensual, but we had this rape in the bathroom in Rockville High School.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, this high-powered law firm came and represented the two gentlemen who did the deed in the boys' room, and they got off, and no one knows what happened to them. They just poof disappeared. They were 18 years old. They shouldn't have been in the high school to begin with.
They looked 30 from their photographs.
Well,
that often
they were
happens,
older.
right?
They were older.
Right.
So, we just don't, where did the funding come from? Why did they step up to defend these guys? It really is just, very disheartening. And again, as a parent, what is going on? Why are we defending people like that and letting them out on the streets again? And there's lots more that we did not hear about. There are plenty of cases. The police have told me they have downgraded. When it gets to the court system, they downgrade it. If it's less than a year, then they don't have to talk to ICE.
Yes.
So it becomes 363 days.
Right. So there's an intersection here between sort of domestic, sort of run-of-the-mill left-wing ideas, for example, restorative justice, right? And that has been foisted upon all of the government schools. In part, it's what enabled the Parkland shooter. The idea that the worst of the lemons that are in the public school system should avoid the criminal justice system for an alternate system that basically allows them to operate under the radar screen until they end up in your school shooting and killing multiple numbers of innocent children. So you have that already pre-existing in the government school system, and then you marry it to, as you say, and as I've identified, the illegal alien lawyers lobby, and you end up with this nightmare of the worst of the worst of MS-13 gangsters who pose as youth. I mean, whoever is able to verify what the actual ages of them are, and they come in, and they, like I said, they look like they're in their 30s, getting a free ride. I mean, they're not getting an education. I don't know what they're doing, but they're doing something in the bathroom and then getting off scot-free. Yeah, it's horrific. I'm so glad that I had made that decision to move away from Montgomery County. But the fact is, and I've talked about this there is no safe space, because the same thing is happening in Colorado now. And, you know, it's always easy to blame California. Oh, this is the Californication of Colorado. But it's really not, because it's coming from everywhere. Yeah.
I believe that after financial, one of the major roadblocks that's keeping things from getting done on this is definitely public dissonance caused mostly by the media bias. So what would you suggest to rectify that largely liberal skewed, media bias that we have going on?
Well, I think it's one of the primary reasons that I expanded from being a newspaper and print person to jumping into the internet world in the first place. And there was somewhat of an early adopter reward for that early generation of conservative bloggers who were able to do a lot of this investigative reporting and make a difference. And then, of course, Silicon Valley realized they have too much power, and that's why you've seen all of these deplatformings. But to the extent that those of us who are still sort of, even if we're shadow banned like I am on these platforms, still can amplify other people's voices. And like I said, there is strength in numbers. But in the meantime, I think what we really need to do is plan for the future and think about a post-Facebook, post-Twitter world. Even if that means going back to, I don't know, print newsletters and postcards. It's funny, because free market conservatives have always said that we need to just privatize the post office. Actually, maybe we might want to rethink that, because it's one of the few places that I'm still able to communicate without a concern of a ban hammer. But who knows? I mean, there's no sanctuary space in that regard. But I think we have to dial back even further. And one of the most important things I did was talk about, even before you have, say, college age or older news consumers, what's happening is a brainwashing in the public schools. It all goes back to the public schools. And I analyze some of the teaching tolerance curriculum that has proliferated from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Each one of those textbooks should come with some sort of warning label that talks about the lawsuits, that talks about the defamation settlements, that talks about the smear campaign, and that talks about the internal whistleblowers within the SPLC that have accused the founder, Morris Dees, of racial discrimination and sexual harassment. Like, shouldn't parents know that that organization is now teaching their kids to obliterate the difference between legal and illegal immigrants? The guilting, the dreamer propaganda that passes as academic curriculum. There are tens of thousands of teachers who are certified through the Teaching Tolerance program, and they exploit things like the September 11th terrorist attacks. And their lesson from it is not that we should have greater immigration enforcement, but that we should open the floodgates. When you start with that, by the time these kids are watching CNN or reading the Washington Post, they have absolutely no filter unless they have vigilant parents who are helping them, build their own BS detectors.